Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing parlor for another project. Today I'll be showing you a style of skirt that I made several years ago, but I've only ever shown how I did the pattern drafting and sewing for this over on Patreon. So while this is not an archive video, I have a whole new video to show you today, a whole new skirt to show you today. This is kind of an archive style for me, as I did make it first for the Arcana lookbook several years ago. But the style has remained probably my favorite skirt I have ever made, so it was high time I delved into a few new versions. And something I'm really trying to make a goal this year is actually using some of my very favorite fabrics that I've kept in the stash for far too long. Often when we invest a lot of, say, money, or let's say a fabric is from very far away or something like that, in a fabric, it is hard to then cut into it because you're afraid that if the project doesn't work out, you wasted that fabric in some ways. I mean, you can always keep little scraps of it and try and make something else, but if the project fails, when you're using a very fancy, very expensive or cherished textile, it does feel extra catastrophic, and therefore there's an extra anxiety in finally putting those fabrics to use. So I've had this sort of iridescent beetle wing fabric sitting in my stash for several years. I splurged on a few yards of this from Top Fabric UK as a birthday present to myself several years ago. And now I'm a few years older and none the wiser, but it's finally time to put this fabric to use. Let's go ahead and dive on in. And of course I begin with some alphanumeric paper and my basic block skirt patterns. So I will draw a line down the center of my paper to serve as the center front of my skirt, and I will trace both the left and right of this skirt a full front to work with, including the darts and all relevant information. And my skirt patterns are 29.5 inches long, just for reference. I will trace in my darts here as well because I will be keeping these today, at least for one side of the front. I actually do put in a sort of pleat detail on this skirt as well. I'm not sure it was the most successful thing ever. I think in hindsight I was trying to get fancy with it, and I probably would have preferred it without, but you can see what it looks like. But my first real order of business, and the reason I traced a full copy like this, is because I'm going to curve up one side of this. I thought about using my hip curve ruler for this, but really I just kind of drew in my own curve. I wanted to come down at least 9 inches from the top of the waist for my zipper, and then another good 9 or 10 inches of side seam so that this skirt, was functional. And instead of just leaving the side seam open, I have this curved section cut away, so a little bit more leg shows, except that this will be underneath the sash, so it only shows when you are walking, when you're moving around, going up and down stairs, which I think is a nice hidden secret. A blink and you miss it kind of sultry detail. I will go ahead and narrow the other side of the pencil skirt a good 1.25 inches perhaps, and just taper that up into the main width of the skirt. Never want to go like really above mid-level with that, because of course you don't want to start accidentally tapering the hips. You need that fabric to go over your body, of course. And I will also trace a full copy of the back. I was going to try and cheat and just trace half of it, but then I realized I still need to do the curve up. I don't know what I'm thinking here. So I will just tape this first side down to another sheet of paper and trace again the full copy for the back. And because I've already drawn in the left-hand curve for my front skirt, I will just trace that onto the side/hem for the back as well. Not that it has to be the same shape, it's just what I decided for this particular skirt. And if it looks like I'm using quite a lot of paper for the front and back of this, wait until you see how big the side sash piece is, because it is practically a half circle skirt, or a quarter circle skirt pattern. But I'll show you that when we get to it. And again, I did narrow the long side seam, the right-hand side seam of the back as well, that same 1 inch and a bit as I did on the front. Alright, now it's time to make some changes to this front. I decided that instead of having the 4 darts across the waistline, I would go ahead and try and add in some sort of pleated, like tucked details here, and I immediately started drawing these lines in on the wrong side. So this is the style of line I want to draw, but in over here, that's right, because this side, right-hand side of the screen, is actually the left-hand side of my skirt, and again, that will be underneath the sash, so I don't need to add any additional details there. They won't be seen. But on this other side, the more plain side of my skirt, I will go ahead and add in these 2 long pleats. It is kind of a puffed couture detail. I think I would have preferred it actually smooth, but this is the 4th of this style of skirt that I have made overall, and I was trying to mix it up just a little bit, and that's how you learn. That's how you learn. I still do like this skirt in the end. A lot of this isn't seen as soon as I put a jacket on over it, and honestly, most of the time I wear this style of skirt with something that has a little bit of a peplum to it, so it's not actually totally seen a ton, and it gives me a tiny bit more room when I'm sitting down, so I guess, if anything, it's useful. It's just, I prefer a perfect smoothness, even though I'm a human being and fabrics are a malleable thing. Annoyingly. But anyhow, I'm cutting down the length of that new line where I'm going to add in a pleat of fullness, closing up the dart into that open space, because of course we can eliminate the dart if we're going to be adding pleats along the waistline like this. So I'll just cut down this long line, cut down the length of the dart, swing the dart closed, just like I did the first buddy here, and then I will add in a good, I don't know, at least 3 inches along the top. I'm not measuring that. So a good triangle of extra fullness in here. The dart fullness has been eliminated into this pleat. So now I won't have to sew darts on this side. So that's at least saving me 2 darts and basting 2 darts, because I did have to hand baste a lot of things for this skirt, including the dart fullness. I'll show you that when we get to it. I'm going to find the midpoint between both the center of this and the top and draw a line to square off from that I can use as a guide. Then I will lay my ruler along the waistline and draw a line out from there, and then see where that hits along the center line, and then draw up the point from there. This is how you kind of create the proper pleat shape along the top. You can also just fold the paper and cut off the top of the edge. This is pleating these things in one direction if you pleated them in the other. Of course, I'm pleating this with the fullness towards the waist, as you can see. If you wanted to pleat this with the fullness towards the side seam, the shape would need to be different. But I should tape down some of my floops back here, because of course anytime I'm adding in scraps of paper, things get floopy quickly back here. And you wouldn't want any of these bits to get caught on something and tear. Ask me how I know. And yes, I am listening to Starter Marriage with Allison Raskin and her husband on my phone here, as we can see. I often listen to podcasts when I'm down here in the sewing room. Podcasts, music, occasionally audiobooks. I often stick to audiobooks when I'm painting for whatever reason, because that is a several hours long project for sure. But I will grab another large sheet of paper, largest yet, honestly, a couple of yards of paper here. And I'm going to square off a line a 1/2 inch from the straight edge here to work off of as my starting point. And I need to mark along that line how long my skirt pattern is, so 29.5 inches long for me. And then we have to decide how far around the waist you want your sash to fall, because this is going to be a circle cut flounce, almost a portion of a circle skirt. It's as if you're making a circle skirt and then only using some of it. But instead of drafting this to your actual waist measurement, you want to draft this to the measurement of the circle if it were the smaller portion. Now, why? Well, it leaves you with a bit more inherent flounce in the smaller portion of skirt that you will be using, because again, we're not creating a full circle skirt that goes around the entire body. Now, of course, you can just use your circle skirt pattern, cut a portion of that away and use it for a flounce like this. You don't have to have a circle cut flounce, you can have a straight cut flounce. You could have the flounce pattern piece be larger and pleat it down to something smaller along the waist. But I just like the idea of having a 1/2 pencil, 1/2 circle skirt here, so that's why I go for a circle cut flounce on this style. But all I really did here was hold a measuring tape up to my body and decide kind of where, just off of center front and center back flounce swag thingy to sit along my waist, how wide I guess I wanted that to be, how long I wanted that to be. And whatever measurement you decide, consider that 1/2 of the circumference of the circle of this weird circle skirt we are creating here. And once you have one piece of the pie, the circumference in this case, you can pop that into a calculator on your phone, a circle calculator, or you can just do the math yourself. Because once you have the circumference, you can find the diameter and the radius. And what we actually need is the radius, which for me ended up being around, I think it was 4¼ inches or something like that. So I added that on to the skirt length along my initial line, squared up from there, and then I'm going to use that radius, measuring out from the point of my square here, drawing in the quarter of the circle I need, and then I will use that as my waistline for this flounce. Now you can leave this pattern piece a square and cut out a large rectangle shaped flounce instead with a handkerchief hem. I do think that is quite fun. I recently made one like that for the very first time and was very pleased with how pointy and Dracula-tastic it was. But I will go for the traditional 1/2 circle cut today, which I'm only drawing the quarter circle pattern piece here in the paper because I'm going to lay this right hand straight line along a fold when I cut this out, and that will give me a large 1/2 circle as opposed to the quarter circle I have out of paper here. I'm just measuring out from this circular cut waistline here, the hem length, so that I can extend this out and cut in the curved hem for this. Again, you can leave it handkerchiefed. I highly recommend it. Actually, you can do any shape here. You could do scallops. If you're willing to hem it, you can see it done. But obviously, just a standard circle cut flounce or the handkerchief are the easiest to hem, I think, in the end. And you can see I did add seam allowance to that small circular cut waistline down in there. So I ended up around what I had initially planned. Again, I'm measuring for a kind of idea of what I want, but when it comes to like a decorative flounce, I simply do not care about the precision of these sort of things. And here are the 3 fabrics I'll be using to construct this skirt today. This is the Iridescent Silk Taffeta from Top Fabric UK, and I highly recommend it. It is extremely crispy, a little bit sheer, a kind of a lightweight taffeta. It's very lightweight, like it doesn't have a lot of mass, but it is also extremely crispy, so it's very papery almost, and that is because this fabric may have a silk like woven into it, but the rest of it is a plastic, like an iridescent plastic thread, a very, very fine little tiny strip of iridescent plastic. I always call it like mylar, but I think technically they're calling it lurex. Whatever the heck it is made out of, some sort of, you know, petroleum-based product that has this super iridescent sheen. It's just been sliced fine enough to serve as thread and then woven with black silk to create this textile. Normally something like this is not made with silk. I don't think anyone other than Top Fabric has this exact type of fabric with the iridescent mixed with silk. I've seen like a gold lurex mixed with silk or like other metallic colors, but the actual shifting like duochrome, if not multi-chrome iridescent thread mixed with silk, I've only ever seen this from Top Fabric UK. I do highly recommend these. If anyone knows of other fabrics that are like this, done in a like silk, cotton, or wool, any natural fiber mixed with lurex, do let me know because I'm always interested. I of course work with all lurex fabrics. I don't really discriminate. I love a metallic fabric. I prefer a natural fiber, so where I can find something that weirdly crosses the boundaries, I do tend to want to give that a try. I'll be using this for the main body of the skirt and also the flounce, and I'll be aligning the flounce in a duochrome, kind of iridescent, shot taffeta from Silk Baron in a purple and green, which matches this quite well. It's only slightly less iridescent than the actual iridescent taffeta itself. And then I'll be using again a 2-colored shot fabric, this time a jacquard rayon lining with beetles on it from moodfabrics.com to line this skirt today. Again, in the same sort of color palette, this teal, blue, and purple shifting color palette. The skirt also does actually shift to green, which I think you'll see in the end more than in the sewing footage for this, because it's hard to capture the full spectrum that this fabric can encompass on camera. But all in all, with a full 3 yards of this iridescent taffeta in play, 2 yards of the regular silk taffeta, and then around a yard of the beetle print lining, this really has got to be the most expensive skirt I have ever made, just based on the prices of the textiles themselves. A splurge project if there ever was one, hence why I was so nervous to cut into this fabric for a few years. Now, because this taffeta is super lightweight and very crispy, I did go ahead and line it with some 100% cotton. Basically it's muslin fabric, but it's black. I did lay the silk layer down on top of the single layer of the cotton, based all around the edges. You can see I'm whip stitching this in areas where the lurex wants to escape from the weave of the taffeta, and I'm just going ahead with a simple running stitch to baste these together everywhere else. I am using bright yellow thread to do this basting today, although you could use a matching color. Of course, I want you to be able to see my stitching here on camera. And I am running that thread through some beeswax just to avoid as much tangling as possible, and I like using a long beading needle, something very long, thin, and flexible. For doing basting like this, I think the recommendation for hand sewing is always to use short, small little needles. However, I guess I am a rule breaker in this and probably other regards. It can be good to know the rules or suggestions, but if you find something that works for you, stick with it. And I'm just going to go ahead and baste within the dart fullness as well, just so that these layers don't move around when I pinch and pin these darts, and of course sew them in just a moment here. I do have 4 darts across the back and then 2 still left on my fronts, and I don't want the 2 layers of fabric to separate apart. I want to be able to treat everything as one from now on, now that I have everything flat-lined in this cotton. This fabric really would be too lightweight to use all on its own for a skirt. I think maybe you could get away with doing it for a blouse. But if you're going to be sitting in something, you need it to have a little bit of structure, you know? But for my first step over here on the machine, I'm actually just going to bag line the sash piece. So I have the giant semicircle, half circle of both the iridescent taffeta and then the iridescent silk taffeta. Oh, shoot. The all silk taffeta and the silk slash polyester, or whatever the heck this would be called, taffeta. I'm putting those right sides together, although again, in the taffetas, neither side is the right side, because they both look the same. But I have them right sides together. I'm sewing down each of the straight edges and all along the curved hem here to go ahead and encase this piece, hemming and lining it all in one. And of course, on this giant curved hem, I do need to clip my curves, so here I am doing that in a rather repetitive fashion. asking for a repetitive stress injury in my hand, really. But aren't I always? And my radiators are clicking in the background. It's 25 degrees here today, and it does say snow in the forecast. Although it seems quite clear and sunny right now, so we'll see how it goes. But if you hear my radiators making their clicking strange noises in the background, that's what that's about. But I'll just go around and zhuzh all of this into place now that it has been bag lined and give this a nice press. I did quickly learn that I was going to want a press cloth between the surface of the iron and the surface of the silk here. Again, I use the word silk lightly because, again, while this is woven with silk, it is mostly plastic, and the iron was feeling a little tiny bit too sticky for my liking, and I was worried about melting this very expensive taffeta. So I did go ahead and grab a piece of muslin to use as a press cloth whenever I had my iron down on the shiny surface of this. But with that, the circle cut sash is actually all finished, and I just set that aside. I just need to layer that on along the waist when I sew the waistband on later. But before I can think about the waistband, I have to construct the rest of the skirt, including finally pinching and pinning these darts. I have the basting in there, but I'm also just being careful while I pin these that the two layers are not shifting apart now that I have this interlined. And the silk that is woven with the iridescence here is black silk thread, so that's why I chose to interline this in black. And I don't think this fabric is sheer enough that you would notice a different color underneath. I think whatever you put underneath it, it would look relatively the same once it was finished. They do have an organza version of this fabric, which is much more on the sheer side compared to the taffeta even, so if you would like an even more translucent version of this fabric, that also does exist over at Top Fabric, who I believe are appointment only if you wish to shop in person, so reach out to them if you'd like to go and see lots of fancy textiles. I have never been, and this is not a sponsored project in any way, I just happen to like their textiles. In fact, I like most stores that have fancy textiles, as we know. In fact, let me know if you would like me to do a video all about my favorite online stores and resources for finding fabrics, because I do buy most of my fabric online, even though I'm much closer to the New York Fabric District. As we all know, I have not been down there yet because it's a several hours long drive in both directions. That would be a very long day trip, and trying to park in the city. I've never tried to, I don't know, drive in New York City, let alone park down there, so I feel like I would not do well. Funny enough, I don't like leaving my cats alone for that long, like more than, several hours. There's no one else at my house to entertain them, after all, other than one another, and there are 3 of them, so it's no big deal. I could leave them, but I feel weird about it. But as usual, I've just sewn from the large end of the dart off the tip and then tied the threads shut. And once the darts are sewn, I can go ahead and remove that basting thread inside of them and then give those a nice press. And we can get a bit of a look at what the outside of this fabric looks like now. That's some tasty weirdness. And again, I'm just using that press cloth to make sure I don't melt anything, because that would be a big yikes at this point. All right, I'm just going to lay my pattern on top of here to make sure I'm pleating this waistline down where I'm supposed to, so I can get an idea of what these little side swoopy pleats are going to look like. I basically added these in just because I wanted to make sure that you could see the iridescence of this fabric, which it turns out we didn't need any extra assistance seeing the iridescent shine of this fabric. Just going around the body is enough to show off the multicolor situation going on here. But now that all the darts are sewn and the pleats are preliminarily in place, I can go ahead and align the skirt's right sides together and sew the side seams, both the long full side seam that is going to be on the right hand side of my skirt from waist to hem, and then on the other side seam I'm of course going to leave about 9 inches at the top of the seam open for a zipper, and just sew the next 10 inches or so between the end of the zipper and the beginning of the curved side opening. And I will leave the basting in along the side seams here, just for a little bit of extra security on those weird metallic threads, if we can call them metallic. Iridescent, metallic, weird plastic. If anyone is a plastics chemist or a textile chemist, textile engineer, I suppose, let me know. How are these fabrics made? Talk about a factory visit I would love to go on. I would love to, like, if I had my own, like, PBS series, other than visiting costume collections and collectors of vintage fashion, perhaps, I would love to do a series going to different textile factories all around the world and talking about textile manufacturing, both the scientific side of it and the art side of it. I love fabric. That's part of why I do what I do. I'm just going to go ahead and press that seam open, again using the tailor's ham and my pressing cloth to make sure everything goes according to plan here. And again, this is a expensive silk blend fabric, and yet it also kind of looks like some sort of like Lisa Frank Fever Dream sticker from 2003. So I can understand if some people end up thinking this looks quite cheap. But I am the kind of person who just loves iridescence enough that I don't care, I guess. I think, it's been quite trendy for the last, 10 years or so, and now it's probably out of favor. Like, you'd even see home accessories made out of, iridescent acrylic or, have wine glasses and stuff like that done with an iridescent finish. You would see those at Anthropologie, and then they trickled down to Home Goods and stuff. So it's probably extra passé at this point, but I don't care. I never like anything because it's in fashion. I like it because it looks like a beetle wing, as we know. And either it is a bit of the magpie in me or the bit of the child that still exists somewhere in my head that just wants all the shiny stuff. But with the side seams sewn and pressed open, I can go ahead and set my zipper in along the left-hand side opening here, where I left this open along the top. I did just press that the rest of the way open, that same ½ inch of seam allowance that the rest of the seam had. And I will stitch the first side, the back side of my zipper, down right next to the zipper teeth where it's folded. Again, making sure that the two layers are not coming apart while I do this, because I do want to make sure I catch both the iridescent and the cotton layer here for stability. But I've switched to the zipper foot over here on the machine, still using my Gutermann all-purpose thread. I have a fresh Microtex needle in the machine today while working with this plasticky fabric. Whenever working with metallic plasticky threads, I like to work with a brand new needle. The windows are shaking. The wind is picking up outside. It often sounds like thunder in my house, but it's not because there's actually thunder outside. It's just because I have not double pane windows, I have storm windows that shake against my 1890s windows. And there's a good, 2 or 3 inch gap between the two of them, so wind gets caught in all sorts of ways. So the windows are noisy in this house. And not, Energy Star rated, let's just say. But there's just something about a real wood sash window with old glass in it that is just more romantic. And that's just a fact. But I lapped the other side of the seam allowance down over the other side of the zipper so that I could stitch that into place. This is just my regular lapped zipper that I do all the time. Again, you will not see it in the end because the sash will cover it entirely. So this is the kind of thing that if you're not confident in a zipper, this style of skirt does not care. It's not a problem. You will not see your zipper if it comes out messy. No one ever need know. Now for the main skirt itself, I am going to go ahead and hem this with some bias tape, and I cut that out of the same purple silk that I used to line the sash. But for the actual skirt lining, which I just cut out of the same front and back pieces, sewed the darts, prepped it in the same way, I did go ahead and trim an extra ½ inch off the hem of this, and then just turn what was left up twice, ¼ inch, and then hand felled that down, just to keep things thin and not too bulky along this second hem. actual hem of the skirt itself, again, I have that bias I made, 2 inches wide, cut along the 45-degree angle. I'm just going to leave myself a little bit of extra where that slit seam begins, underneath the zipper on that short side seam, the left-hand side of my skirt. And the most important thing to remember when using bias to hem a rather acute curve like this, a rather sharp curve, is to make sure you stretch the bias tape as much as possible around the outside edge as you're doing this first round of stitching. So I'm stitching this right sides together on the outside of the skirt, and I'm really pulling as much as possible along the curve so that when I turn this to the inside in a moment, I don't have to try too hard to get the rest of the bias to scrunch down to size. Again, secret geometry is happening in here that I'm not very good at explaining because it's the kind of thing that just happens without me having to understand the math. Which, as we know from me trying to explain circle skirt patterns earlier in the video, I'm just not very good at explaining geometry or even understanding geometry. I know it's happening, but I don't have to know much about it. I run into geometry on accident while doing sculpture. That's sort of how I think of it. But I'm going to clip my curves, then I can press everything into place, press this bias tape to the inside of my skirt here. And one of the best things about having an interlining is I can now stitch this bias tape down, stitch this hem down by hand, only to the interlining so no little stitches for the hem will show on the outside of my skirt. But you can see, even with pulling as much as I could around the curve, this is a lot of taffeta, even with bias, to get to fit down to the curve along the inside. And I will just cleanly finish the end of the slit with the bit of excess bias that I left myself over here, hand stitching everything down along the inside until it behaves as I wish. And it is time to prep my skirt waistband. Instead of interfacing this today, I did just go ahead and interline the same taffeta with a piece of the same cotton, just to give this a little bit more stability, but without adding too much bulk. The taffeta was so crispy all on its own, I don't think it needed anything to help it stand up in any way. I just wanted to make it a little bit more robust with that layer of cotton, really. And then I will finally pin my sash where I want it around the waist, which is, again, just shy of center front and just shy of the center back. Pin it into place, make sure all my pleats in both the outside fabric and the inner linings and the lining are all aligned properly along the waist. Like so here. Again, that is, in some areas, 6 layers of fabric, so it's a good thing all of these are rather on the thin side. Luckily, the Singer 99K, being one of the iron machines, will barrel through anything you throw at it, including leather, so several layers of even weird plasticky silk are no trouble. But because the edges and the hem of the sash were all encased when I bag lined it, and the hem of the skirt and the skirt lining are both finished at this point, really the waistband is the last significant step here, and it's the last step I will use the machine for. And the waistband does extend past the skirt along the sash, so the rest of the sash hangs free past the side zipper on the left-hand side of the skirt. So I cut an extra long waistband, probably cut myself an extra 8 or 10 inches just to make sure that I had enough waistband to go all the way around the skirt and then along that extra extension for the sash as well. This is what allows the sash to flip over the side seam and continue on past it, covering up that zipper like I said. And I'll have a skirt hook along the waistband both at the top of the zipper and then at the end of the sash as well, so I do need 2 skirt hooks for this one. And the interior rayon lining does get caught and sewn into the skirt at this point when I'm sandwiching everything into the waistband, but I'm also going to go ahead and hand stitch that down to the inside of the skirt along the zipper, just hand stitch that into place. And then I will tack the hem of the lining and the skirt together with a little extended thread tack along the long side, the right hand side seam as well, just so that the rayon lining doesn't float around too much inside of here and stays in place when I'm walking and wearing this skirt. But with the waistband sewn on, I can turn everything to the inside, like so, cover up all my seam allowance, and then I will hand stitch this into place along the waistband of the inside. You could do a top stitching from the outside or a stitch in the ditch if you were good at that kind of thing. As I've said before, me and stitch in the ditch do not get along. Then it was time to hope that the cats don't wake up while I do my hand stitching. I did take this actually over to my couch in the other room. It's kind of nice to have a sitting room next to my sewing room at this point, although it does mean I have to be super careful about threads and pins. And I do apologize, the interns just didn't show up for this project. I don't know what that's about. They were feeling sleepy and cozy during these last few snowy days here. They have been tending to nap cozily on my bed in a big pile for most of the day. Although Sophia has just arrived to talk to us. I was just talking about you, Fee. Come here. Are you going to talk to everyone? What are you going to say? She's here, but as soon as I picked her up, she stopped talking. She is purring, though. That's exciting. And like I said, I'll just need to finish this off with a couple of skirt hooks, and this very strange, rather shiny garment will be finished. And here is my iridescent mylar and silk weird taffeta skirt that looks like a beetle wing or something a unicorn obsessed child would really desire if limited to haute couture range. And I believe it was the great Dolly Parton who said it takes a lot of money to look this cheap. And while something this iridescent does coordinate with several colors, I suppose, really I would like to create something in a very similar palette with another fabric I have sitting in my stash, or that I have had sitting in my stash since Arcana, so far too long. The fabric is sitting just off screen here, but I have yet to find time in my schedule to squeeze such a large project in, so we'll have to see. Thank you as always for watching today, and a huge thank you to my patrons who make my work and these videos possible. And as always, I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, crafting, and decorating real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!